Urgent orders for long-range missiles and the formation of a domestic guided weapons industry will be delayed, possibly by another 12 months when another defence review is released. Options will be given to the Defence Minister in the second quarter of next year. Joining us live now, former ADF Major General Mick Ryan. Mick, good to see you. Thanks for your time. So let's get through a bit here. So first of all, this delay with these options that will be given to the Defence Minister next year on which way to go when it comes to guided missiles, etc. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's just a symbol of how the Department of Defence works at the moment. The review is very critical of its slow processes, and the reality is this isn't just a procedural problem, this is a leadership problem. Defence needs leaders that can move quickly, think creatively and take risk. At the moment, we have a leadership that moves slowly, meets often and suppresses imagination. So, we need to really look at the leadership of Defence so it can start moving quickly on these kind of issues.
So this is a few rungs below the Defence Minister?
This is from the Defence Minister down. Frankly, the incentives we have in place for the kind of rapid change that's mentioned in the report don't exist. We've had a succession of reports over the last decade that find exactly the same problems, but it's not seeming to change the issue here in Defence.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, there's options when it comes to missiles that will be provided, as I mentioned there in the introduction, to the Defence Minister in the second quarter of next year. This is in the Defence Strategic Review. If we know what we need, why wouldn't we just get it now?
Well, I think that's a great question. Everyone else seems to know what's needed in this environment, but the review seems to eschew learning from other countries or other conflicts. I mean, the Japanese have just doubled their defence spending and talk about counter-strike capability. The Americans know exactly what they need. Other countries in the region, like the Koreans, and even the Chinese know exactly what's needed for future conflict and deterrence in our region. We seem to be the only ones that don't have a good sense of it.
Right, so despite all the urgency that we're being told about things, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, it's supposed to be urgent and it's supposed to be a really fundamental, game-changing report, but there's no new money for it. So we have to question just how major the changes are that the government wants if it's not willing to fund them. Indeed, in one part of the report, it complains that Defence was planning to spend too much on Defence in the coming years.
OK, let's go to this announcement today. So $4 billion has been set aside. That's for precision missiles as well as the manufacture of weaponry, of ordnance and missiles. My conversation with Richard Marles a short time ago, he gave no time frame. He wouldn't give me a time frame on when he expects the first precision missile to be out in the field. First of all, I'll get your response to that.
Well, it should be out in the field now. I mean, we were writing requirements for these kind of capabilities, particularly like HIMARS, in 2013. And these were designed not to replace combat capability, but to supplement it. So gutting the army to pay for a few long-range missiles isn't going to work, to be quite frank, and it's not going to deter anybody. But we also should ask, who are we going to work with on building these missiles? We've destroyed our relationship with the French and the Korean defence industries in the last couple of years by going back on commitments. I mean, other countries are going to be wary of partnering with Australia in the future because of these kind of things. OK, and then as to the manufacture of weaponry, Richard Marles again, he says he expects that to happen within the next couple of years. A bit vague on the timeline, but seemed assured that it would happen, that we'd have our first locally made weapon out in the field within the next couple of years. I mean, are you buying that? I'd love to think that's true. I mean, we need this stuff now, but we set up the Guided Weapons and Explosive Ordnance Enterprise a couple of years ago. It hasn't produced a lot, and indeed this government doesn't appear to want to spend as much on this enterprise as previous government did. So, I think we need to keep an open mind what's going on and have a close look at the budget when it comes out in May for real expenditure, not pretend expenditure.
So is the Defence Strategic Review as a whole a letdown for you, Mick?
Well, it covers a whole lot of things, but doesn't add up to a whole lot. It's certainly not the most fundamental review in the last few decades, as promised. The strategy is not clear. How the ADF is going to work together as an advanced, networked, lethal, deployable force is very unclear. And things like resourcing and people issues just are not covered to the degree that they should be in such a fundamental review of our defence.
Well, I mean, it also talks about the level of troops. We're going to need more. There's a question over how many, though. That question wasn't answered. Also, like you said, funding. I mean, there had been so much talk about, as a percentage of GDP, what level it would go to, 3, possibly 4, the late Jim Molan had said we needed to get to. No answer on that either. So, I mean, key questions without answers.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be a reluctance to talk about percentage of GDP we spend on defence when every other sophisticated country engages in that conversation all the time. NATO has a benchmark. The Japanese have courageously doubled their GDP to be spent on defence over the next 5 years. So, you know, this is an important conversation, but without new money, none of these changes are probably going to occur.
All right, Mick Ryan, former ADF Major General, appreciate your time. Thanks, Mick.